Welcome to the Asset Preservation Hour. My name is Cynthia DeFazio. I'm joined today by Stuart Willis of Asset Preservation, Wealth and Tax. And stay tuned. If you're wondering what's going to happen in the markets in the years to come, you're not going to want to miss today's episode. Stuart, how are you this morning?
Oh, I'm doing awesome. Now that I have my good friend Spike here with us, he's holding my hand.
Exactly.
Through
this, Thank you so much for letting me out of the radio booth. I do the radio show with Stuart weekly, as you know, Cynthia. KTAR, KFYI, we do a full hour of it, but I got to be quiet because we only have half hour for TV.
Well, I was looking for the opportunity to introduce you, Spike, but you just took it away. So nice to have you on the show.
Cynthia.
So, Stuart, oh my goodness, there is so much happening in the world right now, especially revolving around the markets. I have to ask you, what is going on today?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're in a completely different, time period now. The markets are different today. I think the one thing we've settled all the debt issues, thank goodness. I mean, that was really kind of looming out there.
It's settled?
Well, I mean, for now.
We raised the credit card limit.
It's a Band-Aid.
A little bit. Wasn't as bad as we thought, but, there were some compromises going on there. But I think people have to really put in perspective why it's so important. And we have this graphic, and I'm kind of coming out of the box quick with graphics here. But this graphic here is a graphic of the national debt. And I think to put into perspective here, you have to understand we are in these incredibly historic times in terms of the debt. And I think, Spike, the market has been volatile. I think it's been all over the place. Obviously, we've had a decent start to the year here.
Better, obviously, than what happened in 2022. But the debt talk, the inflation talk, I think what many retirees are worried about is, will we come out of this?
Yeah.
Can we study the history? Is this going to be like the last decade and a half? Do we have to change our retirement strategy?
Exactly.
Well, I think it's really important to understand, when you talked about the history, I think it's important to look at the history of the markets. And, I always like to pull up the history of the S&P 500, so I'll pull that slide up also. When we look at that history of the S&P 500, obviously, we saw this amazing run. We had this 12-year amazing run. The stock market did well. Last year did not so well, and we've got a decent little start here to the year here. But I think the one point I want to point out here is the two different humps you see, those green humps on the left, right? Where it peaked up in the 90s for the dot-com boom, then the dot-com crash, then we had the recovery up till 2008, and then we had the financial crisis. And quite honestly, when you look at these graphics here, you'll see from 2000 to 2012, literally the S&P 500 did nothing, right? Yeah. It's just flat. It's a lost decade, we refer to that as.
Sure.
So, I think, Cynthia, the big question going into retirement is, how are things going to be different moving forward, right? And, I had one of my great clients came up to me yesterday in one of our meetings, and she said, her son was just concerned, like, why is she paying a financial advisor when she should just put it into the NASDAQ, put everything into the NASDAQ? And that really scares me because when you look back historically, I started this business in 1999.
Yeah.
And I just remember all the clients that had to go back to work because their kids were managing their portfolios in the 90s, right? And there's a lot of risk, in there. And what I was trying to prove to you guys by showing you the S&P 500 slide is, I say it all the time, a blind chicken could have made money in the market for the last 12 years. So I think it's really kind of played with people's, comfort level with investing.
Right, and the way that the environment has changed, though, I know that you're a numbers person. I know you crunch this together. What about interest rates? What has changed in the last few years, especially in the last 12 months with interest rates? Do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, so we are in a really, funky time right now where interest rates have spiked, and with all...
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All pun intended
Coined
here.
by me.
That was a plug.
Yes,
Definitely
Spike.
a plug.
No, but I think that, look, interest rates have spiked, and it's caused a couple of things. Obviously, last year it created some problems because as interest rates rise, typically bond values drop. And so I've talked about the S&P 500. What I want to show you is an overlap slide, and I'm going to skip over the 10-year Treasury slide and jump right to an overlap slide of the S&P 500 and TLT. TLT is a 20-year Treasury ETF from iShares. It's generally a fantastic ETF. But if you were an aggressive investor last year and you put it all into the S&P 500, you're down 19.5%. If you would have put it into TLT, for example, which is long-term Treasury bond ETFs, you're down 32%. So there's a lot of risk out there in things that are, historically considered conservative. And so the world has changed. I think it's just a different environment.
So if you've been making financial plans based on the previous 10-year history, the 10-year history before that, when you're talking about all the gains in the market, our financial plan is completely off course then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rules are completely different now. I think people that have based the retirement on an assumption of the rate of returns that we've seen for the last decade, have a really hard time coming here, and I think they just have to remember we're in a different world today, a world that we weren't in, just a couple years ago. We had a couple crazy things happen. Obviously, we had COVID to kind of begin the end of this, right?
Of course.
And then all the spending that ensued, and that's why we have the national debt. And of course, now that's why we're seeing that tremendous amount of inflation, rising interest rates, etc.
Sure. And Stuart, how does this affect the stereotypical 60-40 portfolio with the interest rates being on the higher side right now? What is that doing overall to that type of portfolio?
Yeah, I think the 60-40 portfolio for the most part is outdated at this point. I think people, what they saw with the bond crash that we saw essentially last year is that, does it really make sense for a 4 or 5% upside in bonds to risk 20 or 30%? I mean, that's a pretty big downside for very little upside. And I think, people just need to put into perspective that, clients have done their jobs. They put away all this money. I use this analogy all the time. My son used to race go-karts all over the world, and he was, one of the best drivers in the world at one time, and now he's one of the worst basketball players in the world. He tries out, he loves it.
But good college student.
Yeah, he moved on to college and did not make the team at UCLA, of course, but in fact, he knew not even to try. But just kidding. I love him dearly. But I use this analogy all the time. These kids, we would travel across the country to these big races, and these kids would go out and they'd win a race, and then on their victory lap, showing off to the crowd, they'd crash their cars. I think that's a lot of what we're seeing with our clients, where they've done a good job, and then they just put in too much risk inside their portfolio going into retirement. Just know this: if you're close to retirement, don't take unnecessary risk when you've already won the race. Don't crash your car into the victory lap, so to speak.
Well, Stuart, we're going to be opening up the phone lines in just a moment, but you have a very special offer to present. Let's talk about what that is before we take our first commercial break.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I want to talk about is it's very important to understand what kind of risk you're actually taking. And what we're offering the audience today is a complimentary portfolio review. Now, in that complimentary portfolio review, we'll tell you whether we think you've already won the race or what it is you need to do to make sure that you don't crash your car in that victory lap. But you have to take action today. For the first 10 callers, if you give us a call at 833-602-PLAN, that's 7526. So it's 833-602-PLAN, or even easier, pick up your smartphone, click on that QR code. It'll take you to assetpreservation.com. What we're going to do is we're going to look at what kind of risk you're taking, what kind of fees you're paying, and maybe you're building up a tax time bomb that can put you into a lot of jeopardy going into retirement. But we're willing to help. You have to take action.
Stuart, thank you so much. And Spike, thank you so much. To our viewers at home, that number is on your screen, 833-602-7526, or even easier, 602-PLAN. We're going to take a very short commercial break here on the Asset Preservation Hour, but don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about some mistakes that people make that may jeopardize their retirement. Stay tuned.
We know the market is going to get worse from here. This is the biggest monthly decline in 10 years. People's 401ks took a major hit.
Well, my investments are tanking. My retirement isn't going as planned. I can't believe I let my kid talk me into buying crypto. I mean, what is that anyway?
This was the fourth worst contraction in history.
So how are you two doing?
Your financial future doesn't have to be uncertain. I'm Stuart Willis with Asset Preservation Wealth and Tax. If you have amassed a nest egg, it's time for a financial advisor to help you reach your retirement goals. We are in one of the greatest tax windows in history, so it makes sense to take advantage of this tax discount while you can with your partners in retirement. All of our expert advisors, CPAs, and enrolled agents are fiduciaries that specialize in retirement planning, tax mitigation, estate planning, and more. Plan your retirement right. Call right now for your own complimentary portfolio review and tax analysis.
Welcome back to the Asset Preservation Hour. My name is Cynthia DeFazio. I'm joined today by Stuart Willis of Asset Preservation Wealth and Tax, and our special guest on the show, Spike Spangle, radio host, TV host, all of it. So nice to have you here. So Spike, I have to ask you a question. Sorry, I'm going to go with Stuart. Stuart, I'm going to ask you a question.
His show. We'll focus on Stuart over here.
Spike, what do you think? Stuart, what are some common mistakes that you're seeing with people that they're jeopardizing their retirement without even realizing it? What are you seeing with that?
Well, I think number one, self-management is one of the biggest risks because, like I said in the first segment, the market has done unbelievably well. And people have assumed that they just had this brilliance and were able to do well in the markets. I had a client that said, hey, you know what? I doubled my money over the last 4 years. And great, the market quadrupled, so you only did half as well as the market did. And I think that having proper money management going into retirement is really, really important.
The do-it-yourselfers, though, what I'm worried about is, would you go ahead and invest exactly like a billionaire does?
No, it's totally different.
All right. Well, Warren Buffett has said that the regular investor should probably just buy the S&P 500 and leave it at that. Now, here's somebody who buys big blue chip stocks, buys, holds, and I hear this all the time. People say, I just want to invest like Warren Buffett. What about what the billionaire says? Should we just stay with the ETFs in the middle of the road?
Well, question. It's funny because when Warren Buffett says to just buy the S&P 500, well, first of all, what is Berkshire Hathaway about, right? They have their own investment strategy. There's a reason people buy them. They do a good job in managing, their accounts. But, Spike, that's fantastic advice for people that live in a vacuum and will react absolutely perfectly. But the reality is people don't do what they're supposed to do. Meaning people get aggressive when the markets are good. They get conservative when the markets are bad.
Right. There's another study, and I forget exactly what source it came from, but it shows that the average fund makes more than the average investor makes off of that fund.
Wow.
They're buying and selling at all of the wrong times. I mean, it's a great time. That's what we talk about. It's not just about the investments. It's the emotional choices we make with the investing. And right now, I just think there's a lot of spook and fear out there.
Yeah, because I think the reality is buying the S&P 500, while it looks great over time, you have to understand that, that's also assuming people are going to hold their positions over that time. And just remember, there's emotions that guide you when you invest. There's fear and there's greed. And those two emotions oftentimes can, have a big impact on the way you invest and what your overall outcome is going to be.
Right. Sure. Well, Stuart, how do you help assess someone's comfort level, if you will, with risk? Are there tools that you can use to help determine that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, number one, people have to get in control of this, shifting risk tolerance, to get a real assessment of where they stand, what their comfort level is with risk. And I think, 2022 was a good indicator that, people just didn't know what kind of risk they were taking, right? Because look, when the market's doing amazing, you want to capture all of it. But then, you don't want to lose any of the downside. You just have to remember your pain points and what comfort level you have so that you're in the right portfolio. And the nice thing is we have those tools to analyze whether it's appropriate or not for you.
Well, I should ask you, Stuart, shouldn't all financial advisors be assessing their clients' risk tolerance, if you will? Does everyone do this or not really?
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, advisors have to assess risk tolerance in order to put their clients in a portfolio. But we're in a different time today than we were, 2 or 3 years ago, right? When people had this smooth market, no volatility, people were just full throttle and it felt good. It felt like things were going well. And I just think things have shaken up. And I think that, people need to make sure that they're doing the right thing.
Do you assess risk by, we hear all kinds of commercials, do you do it by like a risk number? Do you do it by monetary value? I think it's hard for people to conceptualize. What does risk mean? Oh, well, you're at a risk of 9 or you're at a risk of 99. What does that mean if you don't actually apply dollars to it?
Well, then I think it's really important, to understand, people's overall mentality, right? Like, so whether it's percentages or dollars, whatever, listen, whether you have, $10,000 or $10 million, you still may react in a certain way to the market. And I think that the psychology of investing is something that's greatly, overlooked. And, I think everyone knows you're supposed to buy low and sell high. But typically, people are oftentimes, I don't want to say typically, oftentimes people do just the opposite. And so we have this slide that talks about the psychology of investing, the emotions people go through when they invest. I'm going to pull up that emotions slide here now too. And when you look at this investor emotions slide, you take a look, right? Everyone knows you buy low, sell high. But what happens is people start seeing the market going up and then they buy at the top. And the market crashes, they sell at the bottom, right? It's kind of like crypto, right?
I was just gonna say, you literally just took it right out of my mouth.
But what happens is these people do just the opposite of what they're supposed to do fundamentally, and it just fails. And that's where people risk these hard-earned, savings that they put away for years and years. That's why it's really important to understand your comfort level with risk.
And if you want to study it, I mean, seriously, you can just look back at the last year or so, and we're in no way suggesting look at cryptos right now. But everybody was buying into the highs as it was going into the 20,000s, 30,000s, 40,000. And now, because there are lawsuits against a lot of the cryptocurrency banks and institutions, people are selling out on it. I don't know if it's a real commodity or not, but basically you can study that history. We do the same thing in the markets. We're doing it in the interest rate markets. We're doing it in the bond markets. We're reacting to the emotions. Now, the other thing I want to remind folks on is that Stuart is actually financial advisor, president of Asset Preservation, Wealth and Tax. That's part of what you do, is help people from jumping off that ledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we try to, right? We try to have open communication. All of my clients have my personal cell phone number. So, look, last year was tough. I mean, I went from getting 2 or 3 calls a day to 30 or 40 calls a day in 2022. And it was tough. It was tough to keep up. It was an emotionally tough time. But look, I've had it easy for a decade, right? The markets have been smooth and they've gone up. And then, 2022 was a complete disaster. And I just think it's really important for people to understand their risk levels. And if you have a concern that you're on this roller coaster, that you end up buying high and selling low, it's very likely you're in the wrong portfolio, and you need to find out whether that's the case or not. So if you have concerns that you are in the wrong type of portfolio, or that you're taking too much risk with your portfolio and it's making you nervous, then we're offering you a complimentary portfolio review. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what kind of risks are inside your portfolio, what kind of fees are you paying inside there that are hidden inside there, and what kind of tax time bombs have you built for yourself that could be a major problem when you start to take withdrawals out of those accounts. If you have concerns, pick up your phone, click on that QR code. It'll take you to assetpreservation.com. Or even easier, give us a call at 833-602-PLAN. We'd be glad to help, but you have to take action.
Stuart, thank you so much. And Spike, thank you so much. To our viewers at home, that number to call is on your screen, 833-602-7526, PLAN. We're going to take a very short commercial break here on the Asset Preservation Hour, but don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to talk about designing a tax-efficient retirement. Stay tuned.
People are really concerned about outliving their money. Inflation, taxes, volatility in the markets, legacy. That's what people are really concerned about. Listen, I love what I do. When a client of mine can know with total confidence that they're going to be okay. At Asset Preservation, that's exactly what we do. Not only do we look at your investments, we look at your taxes and estate planning as well. We don't leave any stone unturned. That is what a real holistic shop does. Provide a very clear roadmap so that you know it's okay to enjoy retirement. Success is being able to sleep at night. And at the end of the day, what we provide at Asset Preservation is not only the market expertise by institutional money managers that are some of the biggest and best in the world, but we also provide complete advice. You need to make sure you have a plan. What you can expect from us is to let you know the truth about your portfolio.
Welcome back to the Asset Preservation Hour. My name is Cynthia DeFazio. I'm joined today by Stuart Willis, President of Asset Preservation Wealth and Tax, and our special guest, Spike Spangle, TV and radio host, and just a pleasure to have on the show.
Thank you so much.
So, Stuart, you spend so much time talking to your clients about taxes. Why do you see this as an important issue?
Oh gosh, I have a love-hate relationship with taxes. I talk about it all the time. We have a tax office, in our brand new Scottsdale office, in our West Valley office over in Surprise, and we have this beautiful Tempe office, which is where we film the TV show. It's quite a spectacle. It's always neat to come visit, and you guys are always welcome to come check out the office. But the reason we have our tax practice, it's not about tax preparation. It's about tax planning. And, it's one of those things, I say it all the time. I feel like for the first decade of my career, I was faking it because I didn't understand tax the way I think I should have in retrospect, And it is a nightmare going through tax season. It's 12, 15-hour days. But the information we get from taxes or from tax season is just very, very valuable.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Well, obviously, let's talk about this great window of time that we are in right now, because there's some changes on the horizon. So how do people take advantage of this time in history? Yeah,
and I think it really is an important time to talk about, taxes. And if your advisor isn't talking about tax because, for whatever reason, it's a problem. And when I say we are in one of the most efficient tax windows in history, I'm not exaggerating. I have this tax slide. I show it all the time. This tax slide, if you take a look at it, we're in red right now. And the way I look at taxes is going from the 10 to 12% bracket, that's a small jump. Going from 12 to 22 is a huge jump. 22 to 24 is a small jump, and then 24 to 32 is another huge jump. Now, if that's the current brackets we're in today, but if Congress doesn't act, we're going to revert back to blue at the end of 2025. So technically, we have 3 years if Congress doesn't act. And what we're saying here, Cynthia, is that this efficient window, if you don't take advantage of it, you are absolutely going to miss out. People are going to look back at this time and say, I wish I would have acted. I wish I would have done this. And there's tons of tools we have to
Well, do you mind? What are some of the tools?
Yes.
What are some of the action points? Folks want to know, what are you doing besides just saying we've got to take action?
Yeah.
How do we take that action? And can we do it on our own?
Oh, good question.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. I have clients that, are engineers. They'll design, avionics packages for the Apache helicopter over at Boeing, or they're, doing secret things on the F-33 over at Luke. But, and I don't know those things, but I think really smart engineers, really smart doctors know their limitations, right?
Sure.
I believe I had one of the great surgeons do my shoulder, a great doctor out of Mayo Clinic named Anikar Chabra. He's fantastic, and now I'm back to lifting weights. I'm probably going to tear it again soon, but but look, I seek advice from people that are good at what they do. Right? And I think it's really important for you guys to do the same thing too. And when it comes to taxes and tax planning, there are tons of tools. One of them is the Roth, right? And most people know that Roth is better. They just don't know how to implement it.
I'm going to only disagree slightly. I just don't think that most people know. I'm still getting calls all the time from your radio show. You're getting calls all the time. Please explain the mechanism of the Roth. Saving in it, is it worth doing a conversion, and how do you do the conversion? And you got 4.5 minutes to do it.
Got it. Well, so let's start at the basics. So the one thing that a Roth is, when people put money into their 401ks, for example, or their IRAs, they love getting that tax deduction because for easy math, and I'm going to oversimplify, you make $100,000 at work, you put away 24% of it. I know it's not exact numbers. But, the nice thing is that you're only paying tax on, call it $76,000, for example, right? You get the tax deduction. Well, in a Roth, you don't get a tax deduction. You have to pay the taxes, so you still pay tax on the full $100,000, right? So it's very tempting to do that. Also, the reason people have tons of IRAs rather than a Roth is they'll go and file their taxes, and their tax advisor who's preparing their taxes will look at it and they'll say, hey, you could save, $3,000 by putting $7,500 away. Why don't you do that? And you'll say, oh yeah, great, I want to save some money. Well, at the end of the day, you end up building this tax time bomb. So when you end up pulling money out, it's not just the tax that you have to pay on that money in retirement, it's the way that it affects everything else, including Social Security. For a lot of our clients, they'll have $1 million, $2 million in Social Security benefit as a couple over their lifetimes, and they're coming in. They want to plan their $500,000, their $1 million, their $2 million of investment money, but why aren't they planning Social Security, right? Yeah. And here's the thing, under current law, Roth is totally invisible to Social Security. So not only is it that when you take it out, all the future growth, all the principal, everything's tax-free, it's also invisible to your Social Security. It also doesn't affect Medicare penalties, etc. So
some people tune out here. They go, well, I already saved in a tax-deferred account, in those 401ks and those IRAs. What do I do now?
Yeah, well, a lot of those clients, they believe that a Roth, they're not eligible for a Roth because they make too much money, right? Well, there's something called a Roth conversion. And what a Roth conversion is when you take your existing IRA or thrift savings plan or 401k and you basically roll it into a Roth. You pay the taxes now while taxes are low, so that in retirement, that money becomes essentially tax-free, and there is no income limitations to it. Now, I don't suggest you go do this on your own, and oftentimes advisors will say, hey, well, I think a Roth is good, go talk to your tax person. Yeah. Your tax person says talk to your financial advisor, and guess what happens? Nothing. Nobody ever moves forward, and there's a lot of reasons why advisors don't suggest a Roth as well.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. I'm not hearing that from a lot of other financial advisors. I'm not hearing that from a lot of other financial shows.
It's true.
Why is that?
Well, one of the reasons, I think, is number one, they're not allowed to give tax advice, right? Their firms prohibit it. Number two, think about this. Last year, we saw, call it a 20% downside in the market. So pretend an advisor manages $100 million. We just saw a 20% decline, which means their fees are down 20%. Do you think they're really going to tell you to go and convert another 20% of your funds to Roth and give themselves?
So they lose 40% of the account value, and since they're paid on what the account value is, they're not suggesting, even though it's in their client's best interest?
You know what? People take their fiduciary interest differently. Some of them just, to give them the benefit of the doubt, they just may not understand taxes. I'll leave it at that. But there's other financial motivations. And if you're concerned that you're not getting proper tax advice for your investment accounts, that you don't have a real tax plan, what we're offering is that complimentary portfolio review, where we will take a deep dive look at your tax plan if you have one. If you don't have one, we'll lead you on the right path to show you what the best answers are for you going into retirement.
Stuart and Spike, thank you so much. To our viewers at home, most specifically, thank you for spending time with us today on the Asset Preservation Hour. Be safe, be happy, be blessed. We'll see you back here 1 week from today. Take care now.